Okay, so I was saying that I'm semi glad that this took place mid-pandemic because it forced us onto Zoom. And then I was able to invite a lot more people than usually participate. So my family's here and friends from way back and new friends and everyone in between. And of course, we are thrilled to be here with longtime friend, confidant, mentor, et cetera, Rifki Freundlich, who I will introduce in a little bit. But it's very exciting to have you here, Rifki, so thank you for coming. So every year, I try to take the time and reflect over the past year, things that I've done, things that have happened in our lives, ways in which I've changed or grown. And I can easily say that this year has been a year of firsts. We moved in with my parents for like 9 months on and off, which we never would have done otherwise. I exercise a lot more than I ever have. I eat a lot more healthy foods. I read a lot more. I'm homeschooling our children, and I started doing taharot, ritual cleaning of a Jewish body before burial. When you lose a child, you never stop thinking about the might-haves. What might have been if Leora were here? Would our other kids have been born? What would our lives have looked like? It's coming up actually quite a bit in conversation recently, since it was just Zaki and Uri's birthday, and they were talking about being twins and how they had the same birthday. And I knew that I partially brought it up for myself and to dispel some of my fears and sadness, but I reminded Jonathan about Leora and that he also had a twin who had the same birthday as him, and that every year we remember her and we talk about her. When I reflect on all of these firsts and things that have changed this year, I also try to reflect spiritually and see what things have changed in my life. One big thing, which I think we've all realized this year on different levels, is that we are so not in control. We can't predict what next week will bring, let alone next year, and it's a bit of a rude awakening. We were comfortable in our lives, had a routine, knew what was happening when, and everything was pretty smooth, and then boom, shut down. I think there's always room to be cynical, but I like to look at it as God forcing us to focus on things that matter in life. We don't have a billion places to be or events to go to or birthday parties to plan, maybe unless you're Miriam Seidman, and then you might still have those things to do. But we're just living day to day, and we're forced to look at those days and think about what's important to us and what really matters. It's definitely forced me to say, what is my focus? Where do I want my priorities to be? Who do I want to be today or tomorrow that's different or better than who I was last week or month or year? In addition to the pandemic forcing us to do that, the last in my list of firsts, performing taharot, has also forced me to do the same. After Leora died, I remember my mother had done her tahara and came up to me afterward crying, saying how beautiful Leora looked and how peaceful and tranquil and sweet. I was taken aback by these words, uncertain of what to make of them. I was slightly envious that I wasn't the last one to see or hold her, but also just unsure of what that meant. What does a dead body look like? What do you do in a tahara, and how does it feel to prepare someone you know? I had this on the back of my head for 5 years. I seriously cannot believe it has been this long. And I had spoken to Yosef and my mom about it, but never really did anything about it. One Saturday night, we were sitting in Providence, and my mom asked me if I wanted to join her for a tahara. I didn't hesitate. I just said yes. She looked at me like a little shocked, but we went and we did it. That was my first one, which I did Le'iloi Nishmat, my mother-in-law's late mother, Bubby Buchan, whose yahrzeit was at the same time as that first tahara. It was an incredibly moving experience, strange, spiritual, yet so physical and mundane feeling. I've only done 5 taharot during my time in Providence, but I hope to continue doing them in Atlanta as well. It has literally changed my life. I think so often we get caught up in so many mundane things, trivial matters, random drama, not to say that all those things are bad, but when you're literally staring death in the face, you realize there is so much more to life than those things. It really causes you to step back and reflect on the kind of person you want to be, the mark you want to leave on this world. I know Leora only had a short time here, and her life was filled with positivity, and she exuded only that into this world. She was beautiful and happy and full of sweetness, but I can't say the same for myself. As I started performing taharot and saying the psukim and washing a mate, I thought long and hard about what I want my legacy to be. How do I want to be remembered? What are things that I can do now that will bring positivity into the world? I'm still learning and growing in the realm of Tarot, really just starting out and getting my bearings, but I heard something that really spoke to me and brought it all back to Leora. The word tahara means purification, but the word in Aramaic is tihiru, which means shining light. There are two levels in the process of tahara. The first is washing, but the tahara is the second level, not just preparing the body for burial, but you're involved in preparing the person for Tichyeh, the resurrection, which is the shining light. The process is not for now, it's for the future. This really touched me, not even in terms of the actual content of the message, but just because of the words that are used. Tihiru, light, Leora is light, and we're preparing for Tichyeh. Her name was Leora Tichyeh. Sorry. It just felt so right. This is part of my mission, raising this light and preparing for the future. Taking to Leora Tichyeh's legacy, the shining light that was meant for the future, and doing something spiritual in that zechut. It hit me as a message that God was saying, this light, your Leora, was not meant to stay here. She was meant for Tichyeh, for the future. It takes time and effort and patience and training to be able to see things in our lives as messages or signs from God. This is definitely something I struggle with, and I think the struggle is very much connected to the Purim story, which was just yesterday. We know that Megillas Esther doesn't mention Hashem's name. It's a story of Galut, where we struggle and work really hard to recognize the hand of God in our lives, where things aren't obvious and it's really darn difficult. When Esther is considering approaching Achashverosh regarding the fate of the Jewish people, she has a conversation with Mordechai about the possible things that might go wrong if she approaches the king without following the proper protocol. Mordechai responds by saying, Im hacharish tacharishi be'ed hazot revach v'hatzala ya'amod le'yudim mimakom acher. If you are silent and you do nothing at this time, somebody else will save the Jewish people. Umi odea im le'ed kazot higat lamalchut. But who knows, was it not just for this moment that you became queen with access to King Achashverosh in the royal palace? What is really going on here? What is Mordechai's response telling Esther? Doesn't sound very convincing. Rabbi Sachs puts this so beautifully, so I'm just going to quote him here. He says, quote, "This for me is the ultimate statement of Hashgacha Pratit, that wherever we are, sometimes Hashem is asking us to realize why he put us here with these gifts at this time, with these dangers in this place. Hashgacha Pratit is our fundamental belief that God never abandons us, that he puts us here with something to do. Even in the worst hiding, saying, Umi odeh im la'it kazot higat lamalchut. Was it not for this very challenge that you are here in this place at this time? We don't need to be anyone special to listen to that call, to try to discover the task that God has laid out for us. Losing a baby and questioning God, and trying to figure out why me, why at that time, in that place, with those people, etc. Every year I ask myself these questions. I still don't know the answer, and I can't say I figured out my life mission, but maybe part of my task is this chesed shel emet, is giving back to those who have lost someone, being part of their loss and understanding what that cleansing and preparation process looks like. The recognition that God has not abandoned us, that at times when we feel so alone, we need to hold on to things that connect us and keep us going. This human ability to focus on the good and kind of push away the darkness is another theme of Purim that I found fascinating, and also so connecting to my process when it comes to learning how to move forward and living with and through the trauma of our past. Purim is all about remembering the past, reading it, listening to it, internalizing it, but then not being paralyzed by it, but instead taking those messages and celebrating and moving forward. Purim is also a unique holiday when it comes to celebration. When we learn about the joy that we're supposed to have on the Shalosh Regalim, it's a very introspective kind of spiritual joy, relating to our relationship with God or a new stage in our development as a nation. It's not loud and rambunctious. However, Purim is just that. It's all about the externals: eat, drink, be merry, give gifts, have big parties, etc. Very not self-reflective. What is that all about? The Rav writes about how Purim is an active experiential happiness, almost a fake it till you make it sort of thing. Purim is a shallow happiness. It's not reflective, meditative, God-centered happiness. Why is that so? The Rav explains that Purim represents instability. We don't say Hallel on Purim because we were still slaves to Achashverosh. There was salvation, but not a Geulah. We were, after all, still in Galut. The victory of Purim was not permanent. With that being the case, we can't celebrate with the same content and calmness and connection to God that we do with the Shalosh Regalim. What we don't feel internally, we then need to compensate for externally. The Sefer HaChinuch brings down the same idea, Ki acharei ha'peulot nimshachim halavavot, that our actions influence our internals. Actions are incredibly powerful. Purim is a holiday of Galut, but we are still commanded to celebrate in a manner incredibly different from that of the Regalim. I think we so often wait for this feeling of inspiration. When it feels right, I'm going to do it. When I have the time and things are going well, I'll focus on X, Y, Z. But Purim is teaching us the opposite. Sometimes it feels against nature. Sometimes the lines don't quite align and the sun isn't shining, but we still celebrate and we still act and we go through the motions because they impact our internal being, our spirituality, and our relationships, even if we don't realize. I felt so connected to this. When Leora died, I felt so disconnected from God and Torah, Jewish people, mitzvot, but there was this voice inside that was saying, don't drop it and run. Keep going for the sake of just going through the motions. And one day you may internalize or rethink or process differently and change how you feel. I think we so often are waiting for the sun to shine and things to align so that we can better ourselves. But the message of Purim and the messages of life and death and trauma are teaching us the opposite. Actions are so incredibly important and can change your life even without the internal connection at the beginning. Life is a challenge, and every time we reevaluate and introspect, we find new things, new ways to be, new things to think, new people we want to be. I love that every year I have the opportunity to join with family and friends and learn together and process life. Life is so fleeting, and to try to make the best of the time we have is all that we can do. I hope that this is a year of more self-reflection, more positive firsts, growth, and bringing positivity in the world, however and wherever we can. On that note, I would like to introduce a very special person in my life who will be sharing some words of Torah, Rivki Freundlich. I know some of you know her, but there are a bunch who don't. Rivki was the Rebbitzin here in Atlanta for many years. She was also my colleague at work, which was incredibly lucky for me. A confidant, a mentor beyond words, an incredible role model in so many areas of life. Her home was my home, away from my home, away from my home, if that makes any sense. When I ended up in the hospital on bed rest with Yonatan Leora, Rivki, I think, was the first person I called. The community took incredible care of us, and I know that Rivki was at the forefront of that, coordinating and making sure that we had everything we needed. When I went into actual labor, Rivki was there with me the entire time in the labor room. And when Leora died, Rivki was the first one in the hospital with us, crying and grieving with us and helping us move forward. When someone loses a child, there are so many wrong things to say and very few right. And God gifted us with these incredible people, the Freundlichs, who knew what to say when, and really beyond words helped us through some of the toughest times in our lives. Rivki has since moved to Canada, and we miss her very much, but she will always be a part of our life. When I realized that it was Leora's 5th yahrzeit, I couldn't believe that time had flown so incredibly quickly. And my first thought was, let me call Rivki. It feels like, in a way, we share this journey, and it is a privilege to have Rivki here to mark this passage in time. And without further ado, I will introduce Rivki.
I don't know how I'm supposed to talk after that. Okay, I'm going to try. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for including me in tonight. It's such a really an emotional, difficult, but beautiful milestone all at the same time. I cannot believe it has been 5 years. And I will say, forget everything I thought I would start with when I was preparing for tonight. Um, but I will say, just knowing that this was coming, and I have Leora's yard site on my calendar, so I always know when it's coming. But knowing that this was coming, that it was 5 years, that I was going to have the opportunity to sort of be, even though it's virtual, but to be with Sonia and her family and some of her friends. There has been like so much flooding. I don't know, I'm sure all of you have experienced this, but when you experience something that is so emotional and so shocking, so painful, so those people who have experienced things like that, everybody knows that, as Sonia so eloquently, articulately, and beautifully said, I don't know how you got through that, but that just the nature is that you just have to keep moving. You're not moving ahead at all. Your brain, your heart, everything is just a mess, but your body has to keep moving because that's just nature, right? The body has to keep moving. And slowly but surely, and this is actually what I was planning to talk about tonight, and I will still talk about, but certain pieces, because it's almost too intense, you have to put them somewhere else. I don't know about other people, but I know that that is very often how I have managed to get through challenging times. Is I force myself to move ahead and then take the most difficult, most painful, most raw experiences, and I put them in a box, and I close up the box, and then I put it in a closet, so to speak, and then I cover it with a lot of things so that I don't have to think about it, because I'm afraid that when I do, it will just be too overwhelming, and I won't be able to continue whatever it is that I'm supposed to be doing on any given day. And I have to say that those days, weeks, and months between the time that Sonia and Yosef had their twins, from the minute, like she said, that they were in labor, um, and when they stopped the labor, and then when she ended up going back into labor, and those beautiful babies were born, and just being there with them. And then a few months later, getting the phone call from them in the middle of the night and being there with them. My husband joined us at some point, and being there with them throughout that night, and being there as they said goodbye to Leora, was something that I couldn't, in order to keep moving forward, I had to put it in my box. As it happens, I don't remember, Sonia, if I told you this recently, but a couple from our shul here in Montreal lost a 2-year-old last year. Her yard site was in January, her first yard site, just out of the blue. And of course, what happens to all of us when something triggers an emotion is that it all came flooding back. Just watching grieving parents like that, having been at the burial, watching Sonia at the cemetery. I mean, just the entire experience just all came flooding back. And what it made me realize is the fact that we forget, or the fact that time dulls certain things, is such an incredible gift. But I've been really thinking about, why did Hashem make us that way? It's really been something that was on my mind. And a few weeks ago, after I'd spoken to Sonia, I was giving a Tehillim class, and a couple of things just came together. And I said, you know what, this is what I'm going to try to talk about. I want to talk about remembering and forgetting. And then on Shabbos, I don't honestly remember if it was today or last week. I just remember we were sitting in our dining room, and one of my older boys said to me, "Oh, it's so weird. I'm totally forgetting Bobby and Zaidi. These are my kids' great grandparents who passed away in the last couple of years. I'm totally forgetting them, and it's freaking me out. And then every once in a while, I'll smell something, like, mommy, sometimes if you're frying something, it smells like Bobby Bubba's house, and it all comes back. And then I can see her and I can smell her house. And it was just such an incredible, like, watching him describe it, and how all of a sudden they became real for him again, because it's been a couple of years now. And how all of a sudden it became real, they became real to him again. And I thought, this is what tonight is all about, and this is what yard sites in general are about. It's acknowledging that the passage of time, and then bringing those people back, like re-experiencing them in ways that we maybe don't allow ourselves to do other times because it's just too painful. So with that, I just want to try to explore these ideas a little bit. None of the ideas are my own. They are just some ideas that I picked up mostly from Rav Chaim Yaakov Goldwacht, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, who was the founding Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva Keren B'Yavneh in Israel, the founder of the Hesder movement, whose Yartzeit was actually Zayin Adar, the 7th of Adar. So we always tend to talk about him around this time. He obviously shares a Yartzeit with many other significant people. And it's just interesting because, of course, Zayin Adar is the day where I think Chaver Kadishas all over the world who perform the Taharas that Sonia spoke about so movingly. This is like their day, right? This is their day. They usually gather, they have some kind of program. Pre-COVID, they had a dinner usually in most communities. During COVID, Zoom, of course. But just interesting that is his yahrzeit that he shares, of course, with Moshe and with Esther from the Purim story. So remembering and forgetting. What do we know? What do we not know? So one thing that we all know is that the idea of zikaron, the idea of remembering, is something that appears literally throughout the Torah and throughout our tefillah. It's something that, unless you're thinking about it, you might not even notice it. But if you're thinking about it, you'll start to realize, oh, sure, we mention Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim all the time. We say it in Shema, we say it in Kiddush. The Torah tells us we have to remember Shabbos, Zachor es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, right? We have to remember Shabbos. We have to remember Amalek. We have to remember what they did to the Jewish people. We have to remember Yom HaZikaron, Rosh Hashanah, right? Also Yom HaZikaron, from modern day Israel, of course, but I was referring to the Tanakh, Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembering. And all of this, there's so much mention of it. It's something that comes up all of the time. What are Chazal trying to tell us? What is it that they want from us? What is it that they expect from us? And I'll just add to that a line I noticed in the Megillah for the first time after listening to a shir from Rav Sobolevsky, from one of the Rosh Yeshiva at YU, where he talks about, right, that Yamim ha'elu nizkarim v'na'asim, that one of the themes of Purim itself, which of course it's still technically Purim in Israel, right? There are cities who are in the middle of their Purim Mishulash, where the celebrations continue till tomorrow, including tomorrow. So it's still very, very relevant. We're still like in Yanei Dioma when we talk about Purim now. And that niskarim v'na'asim, that the mitzvos of Purim need to be niskarim, they have to be remembered, and na'asim, they have to be done. And that specifically niskarim always refers to the reading of the Megillah and remembering Amalek, because the reading of the Megillah is an act of commemoration, right? It's true, it's a great story, but it's actually the fulfillment of a mitzvah of the day. And that mitzvah falls under the category of remembering. And the Na'asim refer to the other mitzvahs, the Matanos Levyonim, the Shalach Manos, the Su'udah, that's the doing. But the remembering, the Nizkarim, that's the Megillah. That's reading about Amalek, right? That's the commemoration. So it's literally everywhere. It surrounds us. I've recently started giving, some of you might know this about me, I don't know, I was never a big Tehillim sayer. I just could not connect to it. I had the opportunity to teach it at Tamima a million years ago. And since then, I can't be part of Tehillim groups. I couldn't do it. COVID hit and I was searching for something to ground me and anchor me. I was struggling tremendously, as I'm sure many people were. And everybody has sort of found their anchor, that what's allowed them to sort of survive spiritually. I think in some ways it's been more than spiritual for me. It's been like emotionally and psychologically grounding, sometimes even like physically, just knowing that I could sit with my sitter that I'd been using, the same one, to say, well, all these Tehillim has just been a very powerful, almost like a kinesthetic experience, like just sitting with the sitter, knowing how to flip through it and get to the Tehillim that I feel the most connected to. And so as a result of that, we started a Tehillim shir here in Montreal, and we've been doing Ashrei for the last few weeks. And so we came upon the pasuk Zecher Rav Tuvcha Yabiyah, right? That pasuk that, I don't know about you, but my Ashrei has changed, because my Ashrei before we started learning Ashrei was like a joke. I mean, I'm walking here and there, I'm moving around my house. Now, at least for Ashrei, I try to be a little bit more focused. So Zecher Rav Tuvcha Yabiyu, a pasuk I'd never really thought about what it means. But what it means is Zecher, right? Remembering Rav Tuvcha, the abundant greatness, Yabiu, right? They're going to express, or they're going to celebrate, I think is one of the translations that I saw. So what I think David HaMelech is telling us in this pasuk, in Parakuf Memhei in Ashrei, is that people forget things. People forget things, and therefore we have to say, Zecher Rav Tuvcha Yabiu. We are going to make a point of remembering and expressing your great kindness, your abundant kindness. And I think I'm always amazed when I see psychological insights, accurate psychological insights that are from thousands of years ago, when this is something you could find in modern day pop psychology today, that people, we all forget. David HaMelech is telling us what we tend to forget is the good stuff. Zecher Rav Tuvcha Yabiu, right? We're going to make mention, we're going to commemorate and express your great kindness, because if we don't, we're going to forget about it. And I think many of us find that that is so true. It's not even the good that we forget, it's the regular, right? Regular is good. When nothing bad is happening, when nothing actively, acutely painful is happening, that's actually good. And most of us just think of it sort of as like pariv, whatever, it was a day. You know, like when I speak to my son who's in yeshiva, who hasn't left in months and months and has nothing to say, the conversation is about, could be, 60, 90 seconds on any given day. And it's just, I just had Seder, Mom. I had my chavrusa's, Mom. I ate lunch, it's not, and that is the biggest bracha, right? That in of itself is so good. That is so much goodness. And what David HaMelech is acknowledging is that it's really easy to forget that stuff, to take that for granted. And so we have to make a point of talking about it. We have to make a point of recognizing it. And in fact, in that shir that I mentioned earlier from Rav Sobolevsky, so he quotes the Rav, he quotes Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal, who says that every time the Torah mandates a zecher or a zechira, a zikaron, the Torah doesn't want us to sit in a quiet room with the lights off and meditate. The Torah doesn't want us to contemplate. The Torah is mandating action, very much tied in with what Sonia said before. Remembering is not a passive thing in Torah and in mitzvos. Remembering is something active. And the Rav explains, anytime the Torah tells you that there has to be a zikaron, a zecher, it requires expression. You have to make mention of something. That's what it means to remember. Remembering is not it's not a daydream. Remembering means I'm thinking about it and I have to express it. Something has to come out of my mouth, or it's as though it didn't happen. And the idea that we forget some things and remember others. I'm sure there's so much psychology out there. I didn't do a lot of that kind of research. I did some other kinds of research, but I think there's a lot that is shared, that's talked about. How can we increase our memory? What minerals and oils should we be taking so that our memory gets better? What math games or puzzles should we do to keep our memory sharp? There's so much by way in the world of technology and the world of psychology. How can we develop and sharpen our memories as best we can? Well, Chazal had their own approach. And I specifically want to share an idea that I saw also from Rav Goldwech Zatzal, where he shares in his Sefer an idea from the Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah, famous for writing his book, Shari Tshuva, but in this particular case, it's the Rabbeinu Yonah on Pirkei Avos. Rabbeinu Yonah is trying to help us understand, why do we forget? And he says something so powerful. He says, Ki teva haguf mishakeach, that the nature of the body, physical things, physical beings, they forget. And then later on he says, but nefesh levada ein shechacha lefaneha, right? The nefesh, the soul, there's no such thing as forgetting. Forgetting is a physical thing. Forgetting is not a spiritual thing. And he goes on to explain, the example he gives is actually related to when someone experiences something shameful. He doesn't give specifically what, but if somebody experiences something embarrassing and they feel like they're never going to be able to move on, and they say to themselves, I'm never leaving my house. I'm never going out in public. And then he says, 1 year passes, 2 years pass, and the event itself never leaves their memory. But what starts to fade are the details. What starts to fade are the emotions involved, how it felt, how heavy it was, how humiliating it was. those things start to fade. It becomes, I think the language uses, it becomes yashan, it becomes like old for them. Like there's so much new stuff. It reminded me, my grandmother, Zichrona Livracha, always used to say to me whenever something would happen and I'd be like super embarrassed and I didn't want to go to school, or, you know, I remember when I was dating someone and we broke up and it was horrible and I was sure everybody would know and I was so embarrassed and I didn't want to walk into the Stern cafeteria. And my grandmother said to me, "Oh, Rivkala, don't be ridiculous. Things are only news for 24 hours. There'll be something else. Everybody will be talking about it." And I think about that all the time. I have shared that wisdom in her merit many, many times. And it's so true, right? Unfortunately, there's always something else that like trumps whatever it is that you thought was going to be such a big deal. Something, and people are on to the next thing already. And so Rabbeinu Yonah is explaining that that idea, that fading that happens to the details, to the emotion, that's because we have a body that houses our neshama. If we were all neshama, as he says, we will be at the end of 120 years, God willing, but a neshama tahora, once it's been separated from the body, ein shechacha lefanaha, it doesn't forget a thing. Which of course, he takes this into another realm to talk about how seriously we need to take our behaviors in this world, because all of that, all the intensity, once we're all neshama and no longer body, it doesn't fade. The intensity stays, which is just a powerful thing that I'm not sure I'm ready to think about. But the idea that the physical is what causes us to forget, in many other sources, we see this is a matana, this is a bracha from Hashem. We would not be able to function in this world if we would experience intense pain, intense grief, intense loss. We would cease to function if it weren't for the fact that our physical selves eventually memories begin to fade, things begin to dull. So Chazal want to help us know that in order to remember things and in order to connect with people, that there are some tips, there are some things that we can do. So one of the famous things that they say is in the Gemara and Brachos, where they tell us, Al yipater adam mechavero elo mitoch devar halacha, right? When you're saying goodbye to a friend, you're never supposed to part from that friend without sharing a devar halacha. Okay, maybe we'll be lenient, we'll say a devar Torah. Maybe it doesn't have to be halacha. It could be a nice word. And then they go on to explain, why is that true? Why is it that before you say goodbye to a friend, that you shouldn't part from them without sharing a piece of Torah? They say, shemitoch kach zochrehu, because if you do so, then you'll remember. You'll remember each other, meaning the expectation is when you part from a friend, and clearly this is at a time where you could go months, years, maybe even a whole lifetime before you saw someone again. Travel wasn't as common back then. So you might not see them forever. But if you wanted them to stay a part of you, if you wanted to not forget them, because naturally you otherwise would forget them, if you want to keep them close, you need to share a Dvar Torah. Rav Goldvicht explains this idea, explains this Gemara, and he says that what you do when you share a Dvar Halacha, when you share a Vort with somebody, is you elevate the experience to being one of Neshama, right? So long as my friends and I are hanging out and we're drinking coffee together, halavai, we should all get back to drinking coffee with friends soon. But those kinds of interactions where it's mostly physical, we take a walk together, we sit and drink our coffee together, we go shopping together. So the conversation, the activity, we're connecting on a guf level. And so when you connect with somebody on a guf level, so the guf takes over, the guf is in charge, the body runs the show. And the body is going to make it that you're not going to remember with intensity that particular person when they're not in front of your face. And so what Chazal suggests to us in this Gemara is, if you want to make sure that the connection between people stays, you learn Torah with them. And when you share Torah with them, you're connecting with them on a ruchni level, on a spiritual level. The language he uses is like it penetrates. And when you penetrate the soul, when the two souls connect like that through Torah, so then you're not, you might part physically, but you're not going to part spiritually. You're connected to each other. And so the idea, shemitoch kach zochrehu, right? You're going to remember because there's something spiritual about that connection and that causes memory. So they're trying to help us understand, how can you deepen your relationships, right? How can you get the most out of the people that are in your life? How can you keep them present with you even when they're not present with you? Chazal have another really incredible insight, and that is related to Rosh Hashanah. So we know that the idea on Rosh Hashanah of us remembering, of Hashem remembering us, Hashem judging us, and in particular, right, we're told that Hashem says the following: Imru lefanai zichronos, kedei sheya'aleh zichronchem lefanai, right? And we say this throughout Rosh Hashanah, or we learn this in preparation for Rosh Hashanah, that Hashem says, listen, guys, you need to say certain things in front of me, and then I'm going to remember you, right? Then your memories will come in front of me. They'll rise up to me. And how are you going to do this? Ubama bashofar, right? How do we create this situation where Hashem will remember us? We blow the shofar, and then all of a sudden we blow the shofar and he remembers us. So of course the question is, but wait a second. When we talk about remembering and forgetting, that's humans. We never talk about Hashem as forgetting, right? Hashem is zocher kol hanishkachos. He doesn't forget anything, right? That's what makes it so overwhelming and scary to think about facing him, God willing, at the end of our very full and complete lives, 120 years. There's nothing that he's missing. He knows all, he remembers all. So what is this business about us blowing shofars that he'll remember us? And so Rav Goldvicht points out so beautifully that what happens when we blow the shofar is we create a memory. And what he explains is that zechira, remembering, he's adding to the idea from before, right? The idea from before, we talked about that when you talk Torah, it creates connection, it creates memory. Here he says, and this is just so incredible, that our job on Rosh Hashanah is, Hashem doesn't forget, right? But our job is to bring ourselves closer. That zechira actually means to draw people, to draw oneself closer. That's what it means to remember. It means to establish connection, to establish closeness. And I won't read it, but what he says so articulately and always so beautifully is that when we blow the shofar, we're drawing ourselves closer to Hashem. And when we are zocher at Bor'enu, when we remember our Creator, when we draw ourselves closer to Him, so then it establishes that connection. And of course, He remembers us and He remembers all the good things, right? It should just always be for good things. So what we see from Chazal is a number of things. We recognize that Zechira, Zikaron is a theme that is throughout our learning, it's throughout our davening. It's something that's clearly so important. And we understand that the fact that we don't remember everything intensely, that things start to dull and fade, is as a result of the fact that we are physical and spiritual, that we have a body, and that the body does a very good job at different points in our lives of sort of overtaking part of the neshama. The neshama itself remembers everything. It is pure, it is holy, and it holds on to everything. There is no shechacha when it comes to the soul, when it comes to the spirit. But the body combines with the spirit very often it dulls a little bit. And during our lifetime, that's a gift. That's an actual gift. But what we want is to remember the things that we want to remember. In other words, it's okay that there is some fading, some forgetting through the course of our lives. It's what allows us to move forward. But we don't want to move forward and forget the things that are precious to us. We don't want to forget precious people. We don't want to forget precious memories, precious events, even precious emotions. We want to be able to tap back into that, take that box out of the closet and begin to unpack it. So Chazal give us some tools. They tell us, share divrei Torah with people, strengthen your connections with people, and then you won't forget them so soon. You'll establish a higher level relationship, a deeper level relationship on the level of the neshama, on the level of the spirit. And they tell us that when you remember someone, that is going to draw you closer to them. So I want to end with just one point that I heard. I think this is also from Rav Goldvicht, but my husband shared it with me. I couldn't find it in this particular piece, so I think it's in another piece from Rav Goldvicht. He asks just a brilliant question, right? If remembering is such a positive thing, and if remembering someone is positive in of itself, that it establishes this connection and it brings us closer. So why do we save the phrase zichrono livracha or zichrona livracha? Why do we save that for when someone has passed away? Right? Why not instead say it about the person we haven't seen in a long time? And we want to sort of like connect to that person, and we want to create a positive, a closeness. We want to draw ourselves closer to that person. And so what he explains is that when a person passes away, when a neshama leaves this world, when the body leaves this world, that finality, that change is obviously can't be compared to just knowing that someone exists farther and farther, farther away, years ago from our lives. That there is no comparison, because the body's natural forgetfulness applies more. It applies more when someone has actually passed away. And while, of course, this is never true about the immediate family, right? Here we are tonight meeting on the 5th yard site of beautiful baby Leora. And I'm sure none of it has faded, not for Sonia, not for Yosef, not for their parents, right? But for those of us who were there, who had the incredible zechus, the privilege to be in those holy, holy moments with them as they held Leora and she left this world, even for us, who I literally thought I didn't think I'd be able to see a newborn baby again. I didn't know that there were so many things that I thought, oh, I'll just never be able to go into a hospital again. And obviously we as people who it was not part of our life every single day for the next 5 years, things start to fade. Things start to fade. They start to dull a little bit. Not the event itself is always there. It'll forever be a part of us. The connection we feel to Sonia and to Yosef and to their beautiful boys, and of course to Leora Zichrona Levracha, well, that will never fade. But the nature of time and the nature of us as human beings is, in order for us all to function, is that things do fade. And so we say Zichrona Levracha because Rav Goldwitz explains, when you say the name of a person who has left this world, you actually bring them back into the world. And when you do that and you mention their name, which really is in the Olam HaEmes, that person's neshama, that person, when we talk about a precious, innocent, beautiful baby, we know there's no aliyah for a neshama like that. That seems, that's so counterintuitive. How could we even use that phrase when we talk about a perfect, perfect soul? But the idea of Zichrona Levracha, when we say the name and we bring the person back, when we bring Leora back into this world, right, that is a connection. First of all, it's a zikaron. So saying the name brings the person back. And saying zichrona is our attempt, it's our desire, it's our expression of recreating that connection on a spiritual level. And it's also recreating that closeness that sometimes fades as time goes by. And of course, zichrona levracha, that all of those memories, all of that connection, all of that closeness that we are all experiencing tonight on Leora's 5th yard site, right? It is all livracha. When we talk about a person who has left this world, so all of their positives, all of their, in Leora's case, right, it was only goodness. All she did was bring more davening into this world. All she did was bring more chesed into this world. She, will have a place forever in the Hoffman family, of course, the Felder family, and in all of our hearts. But the idea that we can reconnect, we can bring the person back, so to speak. And when we say Zichrona Livracha, that we're channeling some of that bracha that she represents in the next world, and we're bringing it down here, well, I think that's exactly what we're doing tonight, right? When we say Zichrona Livracha, Leora Tichyeh, Zichrona Livracha, what we are saying is that we are learning Torah, right? We are learning Torah, which we know connects all of us on this call tonight, connects all of us in a ruchani way to baby Leora, who will forever be our baby, and to her family, to her extended family, right? We're establishing that connection. And not only are we establishing that connection, but we're establishing a closeness that, many people never had the opportunity to meet her. Right? You heard about her, maybe you saw pictures of her, but you didn't have the opportunity to meet her. And when you gather together, and when we listen to Sonia talk about her daughter, and we are here listening to the journey that has put Sonia and Yosef on, a journey, a 5-year journey that is, this is just, I don't know, maybe chapter 2, chapter 3, I don't know. We're still at the very beginning of this beautiful family's journey. But when we join them, when they invite all of us to be here with them tonight and to talk about Leora. So we bring her into this world with us. And when we talk about her and we establish this closeness and this connection with her and with her family, it is a source of bracha for all of us. And it just struck me that I have said it myself, and I never really thought about what it meant, right? Their memory should be for a blessing, right? The memory should be for a blessing. I have to say it a lot here because not everyone knows what Zichrona Livracha means. So we'll always say, you know, at the end of a shiva or something, oh, their memory should be for a blessing, right? So that is Zichrona Livracha. That's what it means. But what it really means is remembering that person is a blessing. It is a source of blessing because it is a source of connection. It is a source of closeness. And what we really hope and pray is that is a source of comfort. I think Sonia and Yosef are, they're like our little brother and sister superheroes. I don't really know what else to call them. They have given all of us so much strength when all we wanted to do was strengthen them. But as we watched them move day by day by day, as they continued to build their family, first to raise Yonatan and then Kenai Nahara, how they have just step after step, decision after decision, just continued to move forward, to contemplate. I mean, for many people, the idea of a yard site is not necessarily a time of contemplation as much as it is just a time of total sadness, which is totally understandable and reasonable. To use a time like a yard site to contemplate and then to express, right? That's Zecher Rav Tufcha Yabiu, right? To be able to say that we don't understand why things happen, but we know that what Hashem does is part of a plan. To talk about, like the way Rabbi Sachs pointed out, the Hashgacha Pratis, that's what that means, right? You gathering us all here tonight to talk about Leora and to talk about the journey that set your family on. That is Zecher Rav Tufcha Yabiu. That is your expression of the goodness and all of the bracha and all of the pain that Hashem has given your family. And it has been a package deal, that is for sure. And I'm sure that I'm not the only one who feels that I continue to be inspired by you guys. I continue to learn from all of you, and just to be wowed, just completely and totally wowed by how you have used this very, very painful, tragic event as something that has spurred you to not just introspect, but also to take action. So I am so grateful to you for including me tonight. I'm grateful to your family for being a source of support for you, and that they allowed us to be your Atlanta contingent while we had the opportunity to live there with you. And I just daven, God willing, we should be together. We should be together for yard sites, but we should also be together for simchas. We should share simchas, God willing, very soon. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for listening. A good tzvach Shabbat.
Thank you so much, Rifki. That was really beautiful. Very appropriate, apropos as usual. Would expect no less. And it was such a pleasure to learn with you again. It's been a long time. So thank you for sharing. And that was really beautiful. I've never heard that about like Zichrona Livracha. Like it was really nice. Like I felt very connected to that. So that was really nice. Thank you for sharing. Last on our agenda is Mom. You want to share a few words? And then if anybody does want to say anything afterwards, open mic, feel free to whatever, but obviously no pressure to say anything. As always, thank you everyone for joining and learning Torah and being together and helping us along this journey. It is definitely a journey and has ups and downs, and being able to process and reflect and express those is like a huge part of our process. So thank you everyone for coming and being part of that and helping us on this journey. So Mom, blast up.
So I actually did write things down, even though I tend not to do that, but I did. And Rifki, as you know, the sort of crises happened in the middle of the night. Everything happened in the middle of the night. And I'm sure it was orchestrated that way so that we couldn't be there and that you needed to be there. So you are the people that needed to be there and offer your connection, support, and to continue that through beyond the events of that period into the future. And I'm happy. we feel very blessed for the connection that you have with our children and with us. So I'm sure it is not by accident that it happened in such a way that we could not be there and that you could. Just another addendum before I read what I wrote is that doing a Tahara with Sonia is something I've been doing for decades. And actually my memory of that was that there was a mother of a friend of mine who had passed away, and we knew that she didn't have COVID, and I really wanted to do a full Tahara on her. Our Chevra Kadisha has been a little bit squeezed by COVID, and there weren't enough women to do Taharas, full Taharas on women. And I really wanted to do a Tahara on my friend's mother, and I said, I don't know who to do it with. And immediately, without hesitation, Sonia said, I'll do it with you. I was like, you will? She said, yeah, I'll do it with you. And there was no hesitation. There was like, I wanted to do this, and this is my opportunity. And then it turns out that we had 2 that night. And the other lady we did was one of Sonia's peers' grandmothers. So, there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we just don't know, and we're keep moving forward. So here's my words that I wrote. And then I have a lot more extra addendum at the end. Leora was a light. She shone so brightly with sweetness and goodness. Her pure neshama was unadulterated and untainted. We were so blessed to be her grandparents, so blessed to have her in our family for her short life, but enough time that she would change the course of all of our lives. We didn't get to know her, but what we experienced was a pure soul, not destined to be in this world for very long. Throughout her life, we prayed for her, prayed that she would survive and thrive, prayed for God to watch over her and bring her peace. God did bring her peace. God did watch over her. God sent her to the best parents, parents who hardly left her side, who fed her, held her, loved her, and ultimately let her go, to go sit under the heavenly throne and bask in God's light. Yes, death awakens us to live our lives with more meaning. Yes, loss strips us of superficialities and throws us a curveball. Yes, we may think that we know something, anything about anything, but we really don't. Death is the ultimate wake-up call. Wake up and live. Take the loss, however profound and traumatic, and find meaning. Our family struggles with loss of a baby, of Leora Tichyeh, loss of a new life, loss so traumatic that it takes Heraclean courage to keep moving. In the tidal wave of emotions that literally drown you, Sonia and Yosef kept looking up, kept swimming against the tide of pain and grief, against the tidal wave, emerging with the capacity to keep loving and keep giving. After the loss of a baby, it takes so much courage to go on and have more babies. Don't ever take it for granted that you will be blessed with healthy children. In fact, don't take anything for granted. In fact, be grateful for everything, the good and the traumatic. Take the trauma and grow, like the oil squeezed from the olive that we just read about. That first drop of pure oil is what was used in the menorah, pure, untainted, with the capacity to bring light, not just physical light, but a spiritual light that literally lights up the whole world. The loss of Leora was like God squeezing Sonia and Yosef. And what we are witness to is a couple who are producing pure oil. They want to live and grow and love and give, and God is blessing them with opportunities every single day. Leora lit up the world. When she died, our family's lights went out, but only temporarily. With courage and with faith, lessons were learned and internalized, and still learning and still internalizing. Her loving, giving, selfless parents had the courage to keep moving in the dark, with Yonatan to give them hope. with a faith that taught them that God is always by their side, with friends to support them and help them. God and we all cry along with you, holding you and giving you the strength and the resources you need to take the trauma of profound and deep loss and learn. Learn to laugh again. Learn to see God in literally everything. Learn to cry. Learn to not know. Learn to give. Learn to have more children. Learn to take risks. Learn to let go. Learn that there's nothing more important than loving relationships with God and with others. Learn to keep learning. What a beautiful family the Hoffman family is. What lessons we must learn from losing Leora. What strength it takes to keep moving and growing, and how important it is to have faith in God and hope for an easier and pain-free future. May we all be zoche to a sweet and joyous life.
Amen.
So one other little thing I read today, Rav Hirsch says something about stars and how stars are so bright. If you look at a star on a clear night, it's bright and it's shining, but the backdrop is dark. The brighter the star is, the darker the background. And perhaps that's part of the reality, that when it's dark, we have to learn how to shine brighter. And I think Sonia and Yosef are showing us that amidst the darkness, there's still a lot of light that we're all shining. Thank you.
Thanks,
for that.
Mom. Beautiful. Yeah, I think it's like every year when I reflect and I think about, I don't know, like I think about names a lot and like different words, and the fact that we named her Leora, and then we like every year we talk about light and like pushing away darkness and like moving towards something, and then like Tichyeh and Tihiru and like all these words. I just think it's like, I mean, we named her Leora because it was Hanukkah. I don't know. I guess everything, everything's like tied together. But I was saying to my mom the other day that I think, names are so powerful. And like Rifki was saying, like when you say a name, you're bringing that neshama, like that's the connection to that person. And I was saying it's like, obviously when after Leora died and then Zaki and Uri were born, that was, obviously we thought about names a lot. But, then you get used to their names and you just call them like, oh, Zach and Uri, you don't think about it. It's just like, these are their names and whatever. And we have nicknames for them and we don't always call them their names. And sometimes like you sit back and you think about it. And then I was thinking like, it's just so like, it's like part of the process and part of like growing and recognizing, like we started off with this kind of like Leora, and I think of it almost now like there's a sense of a little bit of like selfishness to that, like Leora, I don't know, like it was my light, and then I think we lost that light. And I remember when she was a baby and I would like sit in there in the hospital room and I would always say, you are my sunshine. Now I like absolutely hate that song. I will never ever sing it again. But I think that, when I think about like the next children, and now it's like Uriel, like it's God's light. It's not my light. It's not, and this idea of like God not abandoning us, and Zachariah, like God remembered us and we weren't left alone in the darkness. And I don't know, yeah, I don't know. It's always a lot to process. I think that I was thinking about this also because I remember like part of the conversation when Leora died, and I think Rabbi Freundlich came over and we were talking about like what a yahrzeit looks like, for a baby that didn't live outside the hospital, and what kind of shiva do you have? Do you have a shiva? Do you, whatever? And like I remember him saying at that point, he said, it's kind of a blessing in disguise because you don't actually have any obligations and you can do what you want. And I think that like every year on her yahrzeit, it's like kind of, I don't feel like I have to go anywhere. I don't have to say Kaddish. I don't have to, like it's whatever I want it to be on that year. I have like the freedom to make it that. And like, if I want to light a yahrzeit candle, I can. And if I want to learn Torah, I can. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think obviously every year is a process and every year is different, and just being able to keep going and think about the positive things that we have in our lives and ways that we can bring positivity in the world and be better people and think about the things that really matter and be grateful for the things we have, I think is just always a really important opportunity. So that is the agenda for the evening. If anybody wants to share anything or say anything, you are welcome to unmute yourselves and say whatever you'd like to say. And then we'll probably close in like a minute or two. But thank you everyone again for joining and taking the time out of your schedules to be part of our process. It's really helpful and special and feels very connecting. So we appreciate that. Anyone? No? Okay, awesome. All right, well, sending love. Thanks everyone for coming. Shavua Tov. And